General Motors is once again driving home some bad news this morning. More crashes are being linked to faulty ignitions.
Engines are seizing on highways, and GM knew it long before you did.
General Motors is recalling nearly 600,000 vehicles due to engine issues. The recall includes some Cadillac Escalades, along with some GMC Sierra and Yukon models.
Nearly 1 million trucks and SUVs are under recall, but the truth is uglier than the headlines.
General Motors today announced a new set of recalls, 6 in all, including the biggest one all year. Switches in Chevy Cobalts, Saturn Ions, and other small cars have already been linked to 13 deaths and more than 50 crashes.
Warranty claims piled up, engineers flagged failures, and yet these V8s kept rolling off the line. Families paid for safety, but got a ticking time bomb instead. So why did GM stay silent? Why was the fix nothing more than thicker oil? And how much is your VIN number already costing you? Because by the end of this video, you'll see it wasn't a recall, it was a cover-up. GM sold you a time bomb. You paid for power, safety, and reliability. Instead, General Motors handed you a truck that could shut down without warning, even with your family strapped in the back seat. For years, the promise of a rugged V8 was marketed as the backbone of American durability. But behind the glossy ads and chrome grills, engineers already knew something was wrong. Nearly 600,000 full-size trucks and SUVs are now being recalled after failures in the connecting rods and crankshafts were tied to catastrophic engine seizures. Imagine cruising down the interstate, hauling a trailer when the motor goes silent. No oil light, no check engine warning, just sudden loss of power in traffic. That is not a small defect, that is a betrayal. The real sting comes from the timing. Evidence suggests that GM engineers had flagged these issues well before the recall ever became public. Warranty claims stacked up. Internal testing showed abnormal wear, yet the trucks kept rolling out of factories. Families bought them in good faith, believing they were buying safety and strength, not a ticking time bomb. People were left stranded, facing tow bills, lost wages, and the terrifying realization that reliability had been sacrificed for silence. General Motors gambled that silence was cheaper than a fix, and for thousands of owners, that gamble exploded in their driveways. But GM's so-called fix? It was not designed to save you. It was designed to save them. The oil scam that makes you pay twice. When the pressure finally forced GM to act, owners expected bold accountability, redesigned parts, sweeping replacements, maybe even a buyback program. What they got was a bottle of thicker oil. Dealers were ordered to drain the factory-filled 0W20 and refill with 0W40 while swapping caps and updating manuals to match the new instructions. On paper, it sounded harmless. In reality, it was a sleight of hand. GM's solution did not address defective crankshafts or faulty bearings. It simply masked the problem long enough to pass it back to you. The fallout was brutal. Drivers noticed their fuel economy dropping fast. Trucks that once pulled 18 miles per gallon slipped closer to 15. Over 150,000 miles of ownership. That difference meant thousands of extra dollars at the pump. Owners were punished twice, once by the defect, and again by the so-called cure. And the punishment did not stop there. A thicker oil spec became a red flag in the resale market. Carfax reports flagged the change, dealers whispered about problem engines, and trade-in offers dropped like a stone. Trucks worth $70,000 suddenly looked like lemons. And all GM had done was buy itself time. And when the market caught on, your VIN number became a warning label no one wanted to touch. If this already feels too close to home, hit like right now so more owners see this truth. And drop a comment with your story or thoughts, because the more voices we gather, the harder it is for GM to bury it. Your VIN is now a scarlet letter. Picture this: you walk into a dealership ready to trade your truck, but before you even sit down, your VIN number tells the whole story. Instead of commanding top dollar, your vehicle is now radioactive in the used market. Buyers scan Carfax, see the oil update, and back away. Dealers lowball you or refuse outright because nobody wants to get stuck with a truck carrying the stigma of a failed V8. What should have been steady depreciation turns into financial freefall. For many families, this was the breaking point. They had trusted GM with their savings, only to watch equity vanish overnight. Owners already spending more at the pump were now losing thousands more at trade-in. Private sellers reported deals falling apart once buyers Googled the recall history. Online listings flagged VINs tied to the L87 engine. Like a scarlet letter, resale values dropped by 10 to 15%, in some regions in less than a year. That is not a market correction, that is reputational collapse. GM's choices poisoned the very backbone of truck ownership, the expectation that your investment would hold value. And just when owners started realizing the true scope of this disaster, the numbers got even uglier. The truth GM couldn't bury The full scale of the scandal came into focus when federal regulators stepped in. Nearly 900,000 vehicles were swept into a probe after dozens of complaints revealed engines seizing and, in some cases, blowing holes through their blocks. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration confirmed what owners had long suspected. This was not an isolated problem, it was systemic. The defect pathways were clear, connecting rods that fractured, crankshafts out of tolerance, and bearings starved of lubrication. Every one of those trucks was a rolling liability. The response inside GM was just as alarming. Stop sale orders froze inventory on dealer lots. Buyers ready to sign were told they could not take delivery. Technicians whispered about replacements, but parts were scarce, and corporate guidance offered little reassurance. For many, the recall confirmed what they already knew. GM had gambled with their safety, and regulators had finally caught up. But catching up was not the same as fixing. With nearly 1 million vehicles flagged and dealerships drowning in uncertainty, owners faced long waits and unanswered questions. The truth was out, but justice was still far away. But here is the kicker. Even if you are lucky enough to get a recall appointment, good luck getting your truck fixed anytime soon. Dealers in chaos, owners left hanging. GM tells you your truck is unsafe, then tells you to keep driving it because there are no parts to fix it. That is the maddening reality for thousands of owners who rush to dealerships after the recall notice. Service bays are jammed with trucks waiting for inspections, but the bottleneck is impossible to ignore. Technicians are overworked, loaner cars are scarce, and the supply of replacement engines is nowhere near enough. Customers sit in lobbies for hours, only to be told their vehicles will be parked indefinitely. Some are advised to continue driving trucks that could seize on the highway, simply because the dealership has no alternative. For small-town dealers, the crisis is crushing morale. Rows of disabled trucks fill parking lots, turning once profitable showrooms into storage yards of frustration. Service advisors are left repeating the same lines, "We're waiting on GM," while tempers flare and trust erodes. Owners post videos online of their trucks collecting dust behind service fences, demanding to know why a company of this size cannot move faster. The dealership bottleneck has become a symbol of the larger failure. A corporation that left both its customers and its own retail network hanging. The insult stings even deeper when you realize that GM still ran national ads promising strength and dependability while your truck sat powerless at a dealership lot. They did not pause the marketing machine. They did not pause the sales pitch. Only your life was put on pause. And while you are waiting, the warranty clock keeps ticking. Warranty roulette. They're waiting you out. Cross 60,000 miles or 5 years, even by a single day, and GM washes its hands of you. That is the terrifying roulette owners now face. The trucks may be defective, but the warranty is rigid, and the consequences are devastating. Stories pour in of engines seizing just outside coverage, leaving families with repair bills of $15,000 or more. The difference between help and financial ruin comes down to mileage or calendar luck. Owners who thought they were safe suddenly find themselves staring at invoices larger than their savings accounts. For businesses running fleets, the roulette is even harsher. A single truck out of service is an inconvenience. Half a fleet waiting on engines is a crisis. Missed deliveries, broken contracts, and idle workers quickly add up to losses that far exceed the cost of a single engine. Some operators have already downsized or switched to rival brands rather than risk financial collapse. GM's silence makes it worse. Owners feel the company is simply stalling, pushing failures beyond the warranty window to shift liability back onto customers. Every mile driven feels like rolling dice in a game rigged against them. The betrayal is clear. GM knew the defect existed, yet it created a system where the house always wins. If your truck fails within the window, they patch it. If it fails after, you pay. It is not just bad luck. It is a business model built on your loss. But owners were not about to let GM off the hook. They started fighting back. From forums to the courtroom, what began as scattered complaints on truck forums turned into a movement. Angry owners who once posted pictures of failed bearings and shattered crankshafts began organizing. They logged VIN numbers, tracked service records, and built spreadsheets that mapped the pattern of failures with forensic precision. What had been dismissed as isolated incidents transformed into evidence of a systemic defect. Online groups became war rooms, and frustrated drivers connected with lawyers willing to take on the case. The lawsuits reframed the recall not as an unfortunate defect, but as fraud. Plaintiffs alleged GM knowingly sold trucks with fatally flawed engines, then masked the issue with an oil change strategy designed to buy time. Court filings described catastrophic failures at fewer than 5,000 miles, and oil consumption so severe that quarts disappeared between changes. Class action spread across multiple states, each armed with documents and testimony suggesting GM GM put profit above safety. For owners who had felt alone, the courtroom offered validation. Their anger was now a legal weapon, and the fight was no longer about a single truck. It was about accountability. This shift also changed the culture of ownership itself. Once loyal GM fans stopped defending the brand online and began helping each other build cases against it. What had been brand pride turned into brand prosecution. GM had not just lost customers, it had created an army of critics with receipts. And once Wall Street realized how deep this went, the price crash hit more than just trucks. The stock market wakes up. GM insisted it had everything under control. Investors saw something different. The risk of mounting warranty claims, ballooning legal reserves, and waves of angry customers began to shake confidence in a brand already struggling with its electric transition. Billions in market value wobbled as analysts downgraded outlooks and questioned leadership's grip on the crisis. Each headline about lawsuits or regulatory probes sent shares lower, and every unanswered question from executives added to the perception of denial. Traders who once shrugged off auto recalls as temporary nuisances began to treat the V8 scandal as a long-term liability. Questions about buyback programs, production delays, and the possibility of congressional hearings turned GM stock into a gamble many no longer wanted to hold. Wall Street hates uncertainty, and this scandal delivered nothing but uncertainty. The brand that once sold reliability now looked unreliable to both customers and investors. It was a double collapse, trucks losing value in driveways while shares lost value in portfolios. For GM employees, the fear was palpable. Workers on the factory floor whispered about layoffs as demand slowed, while office staff braced for budget cuts. The pain was not just on Wall Street screens. It was creeping into paychecks, livelihoods, and futures. A corporate scandal had turned into a human crisis, and while GM scrambled to calm Wall Street, their rivals smelled blood in the water. The wolves move in. While GM was drowning in scandal, its rivals pounced. Ford, Ram, and Toyota did not waste a second turning GM's crisis into their opportunity. Ford unleashed an aggressive ad blitz reminding truck buyers that its F-Series had dominated reliability rankings for decades. Ram doubled down on extended powertrain warranties, loudly promising coverage well beyond the 5-year, 60,000-mile mark. Toyota leaned on its reputation for bulletproof engineering, highlighting the redesigned Tundra with turbocharged V6 power that avoided the pitfalls of GM's fragile V8. Each campaign carried the same unspoken message: we will not leave you stranded. Fleet buyers heard that message loud and clear. Contractors in states like Texas, Arizona, and Florida began shifting orders away from Silverado and Sierra models. Local governments reconsidered contracts, wary of putting police, fire, or utility fleets at risk with defective GM engines. The ripple effect was devastating. Every truck not sold meant another hole in GM's market share, another customer won over by a competitor's promise of safety. Rivals had circled, and now they were biting into GM's core business. The perception of reliability, once GM's strength, was crumbling, and the competition made sure to press every advantage. Customers felt the shift immediately. Neighbors who once swapped Silverado stories in driveways now bragged about switching to Ford or Toyota. Loyalty that had taken generations to build was collapsing in months. GM's scandal didn't just hurt sales, it ripped community identity away, turning longtime fans into loud defectors. And when those trucks started hitting the auction block, the collapse in value turned brutal. Auction bloodbath. Dealers could not give these trucks away. Wholesale buyers who normally snapped up used Silverados and Yukons for steady resale simply walked away. Auction lanes that once saw fierce bidding wars now echoed with silence. The no-sale rates climbed as dealers refused to accept rock-bottom offers that would lock in losses. For trucks saddled with the L87 engine, the value dropped like a stone. Owners who expected to trade in their vehicles for strong resale were blindsided. Trucks that once fetched $70,000 were now lucky to see 60. Some dipped even lower, with certain lots reporting 15% drops in a matter of months. For families already paying more at the pump thanks to GM's oil gambit, the collapse in equity was a second gut punch. It was no longer just a defective engine. It was financial ruin parked in the driveway. The ripple extended beyond individuals. Banks grew nervous about lending against depreciating assets, tightening loan terms on new GM vehicles. Insurance companies recalculated premiums, citing higher risk and lower recovery values. The fallout of one defect was poisoning weakening the entire ecosystem of resale, credit, and confidence. The auction chaos spilled onto everyday buyers too. Families looking for affordable used trucks suddenly faced limited choices, or worse, bought problem engines unknowingly. Frustration spread as word circulated that GM vehicles could no longer be trusted at resale. What was once considered an investment now looked like a gamble, and while prices collapsed, lawmakers in Washington were sharpening their knives. You've seen the value crash, the lawsuits, and the fallout. But this story isn't over. Subscribe right now, because the next revelations are even bigger, and missing them could leave you blindsided while everyone else already knows the truth. Capitol Hill turns up the heat. GM thought this was just another recall. Congress had other ideas. Memories of the deadly ignition switch scandal from the early 2000s still lingered in Washington, and lawmakers made it clear, no more cover-ups. Committees on Commerce and Transportation demanded internal documents, risk assessments, and detailed timelines of when GM first learned about the defect. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration expanded its probe, warning that concealment or delays could trigger massive fines. The heat rose quickly. Subpoenas were drafted. Staffers combed through emails and warranty logs, hunting for signs that executives had prioritized profits over people. Chief Executive Officer Mary Barra, who once promised a culture of safety and transparency, now faced the prospect of another bruising testimony under oath. The pressure was not only political, it was deeply personal for owners who had been dismissed or ignored. Their stories were now front-page news, their anger amplified by Congressional hearings that gave them a national platform. GM could not spin its way out of this. The harder executives tried to frame the scandal as contained, the more evidence surfaced, showing just how systemic the failures were. For owners watching hearings from home, the moment was bittersweet. At last, their voices were echoed in the halls of power, but it also reopened wounds, reminding them how long they had been ignored. It wasn't just trucks on trial in Washington, it was the worth of their lives. And the deeper engineers dug into GM's so-called fix, the worse the truth looked. The lab versus the highway. In the lab, GM's thicker oil looked fine. Controlled tests with limited loads and mild conditions suggested the 0W40 swap could reduce friction and delay wear. But out on the highway, hauling in summer heat, the picture changed entirely. Bearings still starved, crankshafts still warped, and engines still died. What appeared safe in sterile labs turned into a death sentence under real-world pressure. Engineers who analyzed failed engines found oil passages clogged with debris, rod bearings scarred within tens of thousands of miles, and crankshaft tolerances that could not withstand heavy towing. The thicker oil slowed the problem, but it did not solve it. Instead, it created new burdens: worse fuel economy, sluggish performance, and more money out of drivers' wallets. GM's so-called fix was not engineering, it was stalling. This revelation cut to the heart of the scandal. GM had not just built a bad engine, it had built a bad engine and then doubled down on a bad solution. That combination turned a mechanical failure into a corporate indictment. The company was not only unprepared for the scrutiny, it was unprepared for the consequences of owners finally connecting the dots. Independent mechanics began posting teardown videos showing the gruesome damage inside seized engines, offering visual proof that the oil change had never been a fix. These clips spread like wildfire online, making denial impossible. Every scarred bearing and warped crankshaft became evidence, and owners shared them as digital testimony. And that sparked a bigger question. Maybe it was not just GM. Maybe the whole idea of the V8 was cracking. The V8 myth just died. For decades, the V8 symbolized reliability. It was the heartbeat of American trucks, the engine you could count on to haul, tow, and outlast anything else on the road. GM's scandal shattered that illusion. When owners saw engines seizing within months, the myth collapsed. The once proud image of unstoppable horsepower was replaced by viral clips of tow trucks hauling away nearly new pickups. The very foundation of truck culture, that a V8 was tougher, stronger, and more dependable, cracked under the weight of real-world failures. The cultural shock was massive. Truck owners who mocked hybrids as toys suddenly found themselves eyeing Toyota's hybrid Tundra or Ford's electric F-Series with new respect. For the first time, reliability no longer automatically meant internal combustion. GM had done more than betray its customers. It had shifted the narrative of an entire industry. By proving that even flagship V8s could crumble, GM made alternatives look credible, even desirable. That perception shift is not just temporary. It reshapes how future buyers will measure value. GM wanted to preserve tradition. Instead, It handed ammunition to competitors rewriting the rules of the game. And in the dealerships, survival meant rewriting the rules overnight. Dealers on life support. When your showroom is packed with trucks nobody trusts, you either adapt fast or you die. Across the country, GM dealers faced the nightmare of having inventory that customers would not touch. Salespeople were forced to get creative, turning into triage coordinators rather than product experts. Some offered steep discounts, swallowing margins just to move units off the lot. Others bundled incentives, promising extended service plans, free oil changes, or even buyback guarantees to rebuild a shred of confidence. Appraisers had to become risk managers. Every trade-in tied to the L87 engine was adjusted downward, sometimes brutally, to protect against resale collapse. Dealers began separating safe inventory from the stigmatized trucks, quietly steering customers toward models with clean VN histories. In regions where trust was too far gone, dealerships turned to bulk sales, offloading rows of trucks at auctions just to clear space. The survival strategies varied, but the desperation was the same. Fight for cash flow today, hope the brand recovers tomorrow. But investors did not care about dealer hustle. They cared about the bottom line, the investor panic button. Wall Street does not care about excuses, only math. And the math on GM was ugly. Analysts calculated the potential cost of warranty claims and legal settlements, and the numbers were staggering. Billions in reserves would need to be set aside, eating into profits already stretched thin by the expensive pivot to electric vehicles. When GM paused its $4 billion stock buyback program, it was the clearest sign yet that leadership feared the financial fallout. Downgrades followed quickly. Credit agencies flagged risk, banks tightened lending, and shareholders watched as the stock shed percentage points week after week. Investor calls grew more hostile, with executives grilled about when the bleeding would stop. Every mention of ongoing litigation or recall expenses hammered confidence further. The scandal was no longer just a consumer story. It was a market event, and the market was unforgiving. GM's reputation on Wall Street was collapsing as quickly as it was in driveways, and both collapses had one thing in common: broken trust. And while investors pulled out, everyday owners were left asking, what now? How to survive GM's price crash? If you own one of these trucks, every day is a choice. Hold, fight, sell, or get burned. Owners cannot wait for GM to fix everything. They need strategies now. Start with the basics. Check your VIN against recall lists, and if your vehicle is flagged, push your dealer for inspection immediately. Do not accept vague timelines. Document every interaction, every service ticket, every oil change. Paper trails are leverage when the warranty clock runs out. If you are close to the 60,000-mile limit, fight for coverage. Dealers may stonewall, but escalation can get results. Some owners have succeeded by pressing GM corporate directly or involving state consumer protection agencies. For those looking to sell, transparency is key. Market conditions are brutal, but private buyers still exist, especially if you can show consistent maintenance and documented repairs. Negotiate hard and do not undersell your position. Above all, know that you are not alone. Thousands of owners are navigating the same nightmare, and collective pressure is already forcing the truth into the open. GM may want silence, but solidarity is louder. Because after all the scandals and speeches, only one number decides who wins: the price on the window. And that number is still falling. They said it was just a recall. They said it was just an engine. But what you've seen tonight proves it's bigger than that. It's about trust, safety, and the future of every driver on the road. GM gambled, and you paid the price. But silence only wins if we let it. Share this video, spread the truth, and stay locked in, because the next chapter of this scandal is coming, and you don't want to miss it.